Welcome back to the podcast. The Question Table podcast is part of the Way Home Ministries, and I am your host, Sylvia Geronimo. I'm really glad you're here today. We're beginning again with a different question, and today I want to sit with this one with you. Where has God planted you? Not maybe where you wish you were, not where you used to be, not where you think you should be, but where right now has God planted you? So take a breath with me. Because the way we answer that question reveals a lot. It reveals what we believe about God, about ourselves, about timing. It even reveals maybe a point of disappointment. It reveals what we think about our calling. And I love that it reveals what we think about hope. So let's start with the question. If I was sitting across from you at a kitchen table with coffee between us, I wouldn't start by giving you answers. I'd start by asking you, where has God planted you? Are you in a job you didn't expect? And you might say that you're in a season of caregiving, as I am. Or maybe our conversation would lead us into a marriage that feels steady or maybe strained. We might be talking about a church that you love or one that you're wrestling with. And I've had many conversations about how our bodies are aging and even conversations about being in a season of waiting. And so that would be our conversation. Where has God planted you? But then I might follow up with another question. Do you believe that this place, this actual concrete place, is not an accident? And this is why behind this question, your answer matters. I think that if we believe that God is random, then where we are is also random. But if we believe that God is distant, then where we are feels disconnected from Him. If we believe what Scripture says, that God is sovereign, attentive, and purposeful, then this planting and where you are is not accidental. And that's a wonderful thing. In Jeremiah 29:11, we know this passage and this verse so well. But God is speaking to a people who are not where they want to be because they are in exile and they have been displaced. And He says to them, I know the plans I have for you, plans to give you hope and a future. And then He tells them to go plant gardens. And I want you to notice something important. He says that while they are in exile. He doesn't say that after they get home, even though He promised they would come back home. He doesn't say that once everything improves, but He says that right there in Babylon, in the middle of their exile. And I think that changes how we ask the question. Because that puts a different context, in that we are planted, we are not buried. Sometimes when we hear the word planted, it feels like buried. Have you ever felt buried by your circumstances? How the responsibilities just start stacking on top of you, and other people's expectations, even your own, they start weighing you down. And that grief, it just feels heavy and thick. But a seed buried in the ground is not forgotten, it's just positioned. I love Psalm 1. It says, Blessed is the one whose delight is in the law of the Lord. They are like a tree planted by streams of water, which yield its fruit in season. A tree planted by water doesn't panic during drought because its roots already know where to reach. It knows where the water is. So here's another question I would gently ask you. Are you perhaps resisting the soil you're in, or are you letting your roots go down deep? And that's not a guilt question, my friend. It's just a curiosity question. Because I wonder, what is at the root of your resistance? Is it fear or comparison Or is it disappointment that life doesn't look the way you thought it would? I found that sometimes what keeps me from seeing hope isn't my location, it's my interpretation. Because there's a story we tell ourselves. We are meaning-making people. We don't just live somewhere, we tell ourselves a story about where we live. And I know that sometimes my story that I tell myself is, I'm stuck. I'm being left behind. I'm missing out. I should be further along. This isn't what I signed up for. But I think there's a deeper question here. What might God be growing here? When we look at the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes in Acts 17:26 that God determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. That gives me hope. That's an extraordinary statement. The exact places. Not just the era, not just the country, but the exact place and time. Which means that my current address, your current address, emotionally, vocationally, relationally, even physically, is not outside the scope of God's awareness. Now, that doesn't mean that everything happening is God's will in a simplistic way. But it does mean that nothing is outside His redemptive reach. So I'm going to ask you something tenderly. If you believe, truly believe, that God has planted you here for a reason, how would that change the way you show up tomorrow? Now, why does this question matter so much? Because how we see where we are shapes how we live there. If I think I'm trapped, then I will shrink. If I think I'm forgotten, I will just disengage. If I think this is temporary and meaningless, I will withhold my investment. But if I believe I'm planted, then I begin to look for roots. I begin to look for water. I begin to ask what fruit might grow here. And Jesus says in John 15:16, "You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit, the fruit that will last." Wow, that came from Jesus' mouth to my heart. Fruit that lasts doesn't grow in frantic relocation. It grows in abiding, trusting, quiet abiding. And abiding requires staying long enough for roots to deepen and fruit to grow. So I get curious about the root. Can you get curious too? When you think about where you are right now, what emotions are rising up first? And it's okay to be honest. If it's resentment, then let it rise. Maybe it's relief, and maybe it's just exhaustion. But I love it when gratitude rises up. You don't need to judge the answer, you just need to notice it. Because I've found that my first emotion is a clue. It points me to something at the root. I've noticed that when my resentment rises, then there's a grief that has to be named. If exhaustion rises, then maybe I'm carrying more than I meant to carry alone. But when gratitude rises, then I'm already seeing shoots of hope. And I want to hold on to that. I want to nurture that. I want to water that. Curiosity is not about self-criticism. It's just exercising holy attentiveness. The poet and theologian Frederick Buechner once said, "Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is." Listening to your life includes listening to where you're planted. That this place is teaching you something, and it's exposing something, but it's also refining something. I love that there's hope in the soil. We started off by saying or asking the question, where God has planted you, are you finding hope? And I have found that hope is not denial, it's not pretending that everything is fine. A hope is in the conviction that God is at work in the soil, even when nothing green is visible yet. That there's life in the winter of life. In Isaiah 61:3, God promises to give his people a crown of beauty instead of ashes. He says that they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. I love that phrase, a planting of the Lord. That means that your life is not wild growth. It is intentional cultivation. And I think there's an implication here that if God has planted you, then your presence matters there, where he has planted you. You're not just surviving your workplace. You're not just enduring your neighborhood. And you're not just getting through your family dynamics. You have been planted there. I also noticed that trees don't strive to produce fruit. They just remain connected to their source, and then fruit comes. But I also recognize that there's a tension of staying and a tension in moving. So we have to be honest. There are times when God does uproot us. I've experienced that. My family story started with being displaced out of our culture, out of our country, out of our family. There are times when staying is not faithfulness, but it is covered in fear. So this is not an argument for passivity. The deeper question is not, should I ever leave? But the deeper question is, am I responding from trust or from avoidance? Because sometimes I want to move because actually growth feels uncomfortable. And sometimes I want to move because the voices of comparison in my head are so loud, I just want to go somewhere else. And sometimes I want to move because I assume that somewhere else will finally feel meaningful and quiet and stable and certain and safe. But meaning is rarely about our geography. Meaning is more about our obedience and trust. So perhaps the final set of questions for today. Where am I planted right now? What roots is God inviting me to deepen? And what fruit might grow here that could not grow anywhere else? What story am I telling myself about this place? So let me bring it home. If I could leave you with one image today, it would be this. Picture your life as a small plot of soil. It may not look impressive, and it may not look like someone else's garden, but if God has planted you there, then that soil contains possibility. And the possibility is not seeded in perfection or ideal conditions, but it is seeded in God's presence. So therefore, you can hold out hope, and hope is not in the climate, and it's not in the applause. It might not even be in the outcome. Hope is also in the one who plants. So maybe today, instead of asking, how do I get out of this? You can ask, God, what are you growing here? And allow that shift alone to change everything. So as you go into this week, carry this question gently with you. Where has God planted me? And what would it look like for me to live here with hope? Because God has planted you. And where he has planted you, there is hope. Thank you for being here with me. I'm so grateful that we get to enter into these conversations. So until next time, stay rooted, stay curious, and remember the soil beneath your feet may be holier than you think.